Hi, what a relief. Unfortunately, today I was unable to attend the demo because I've been ill with autoimmune problems for the last couple of weeks, and so sadly I wasn't able to attend, but I followed the march today. Absolutely splendid turnout there in heart and spirit with all the people who took the time out of their day, took their weekend to attend that march in London. A show of force, a show of power to the people, many of whom did vote to stay in the EU, but also a very large portion of people who had joined the Leave vote, persuaded by the lies issued by Mr. Johnson PM. And the lies that he's told do state something, because nobody is that stupid to be able to say the things he said, like, oh, I will never support a border in the Irish Sea, and then next minute that's what he's agreed to, and he's there in Parliament trying to sell it. I am disgusted that it was only by a very small margin, really, that he was defeated. I think that speaks volumes. And really, it highlights the ridiculous of this situation that we're now in. That when you compare Boris Johnson's deal to Theresa May's deal, I mean, personally, I think it was brilliant for Ireland, but really, for Britain, his deal was far, far worse than Theresa May's deal. She was actually held in contempt of Parliament. Nobody, it lost by a huge margin. She was forced to resign, okay? And yet he's come out with an even worse deal. I mean, literally, ready to axe all our rights. And people just, it staggers me that people just do not seem to be able to grasp how hard it was to get those rights and what life was like without those rights. Now, I grew up in a Britain in the 1960s and 70s, in a Britain that had won those rights. My grandfather, whom I never knew, as a person in my life, except as a dead war hero. That was it. Okay, I had a photograph of my granddad. My mum, she never knew her dad. She was 2 years old when he died, when he passed away during the Second World War. He was killed. There's so many men like him. And I wrote something in response to this today on my Twitter, and I do think that it's, a very, very important point. The war dead of World War II had never known the rights they won for future generations. Men who never saw their children, sons and daughters who never knew their dads. Their courage wrote the deeds to a lasting social legacy that the inheritances of wealth and privilege will never defeat. And, that's what is going on right now with this Brexit. This is what it is all about. And the fact that it has even achieved the level of popularity that it had, this Brexit idea, is only because there are very powerful people, with very wealthy and very powerful people backing it. The kind of people like Rupert Murdoch, who own, something like 50% of our media, the people controlling the BBC. Okay, they've had to back Brexit a lot more covertly, but we recognise their absolute bias and the BBC's criminal behaviour, actually, in that they balanced facts with fiction, absolute outright lies. That was their idea of fair coverage, of giving equal coverage to lies as well as facts, and really never holding the people issuing the lies to full account. Like, for example, Boris Johnson's recent claims about, you know, going on about the £1 billion a month he alleges, still, even though we know it's a lie, but still he continues with his lie. £1 billion a month he claims we're paying to the EU. Okay, but nobody talks about the £1 billion a week that we are paying to bail out British bankers, to bail out the bankers, okay? The banking bailouts, £1.27 trillion, and the interest on that is £1 billion a week, okay? £1 billion a week is the interest on it. And why is it that the BBC cannot, when they're interviewing somebody like Boris Johnson on their various programmes, why can't they turn around and explain to him when he starts going on about £1 billion, or even just ask him about it, that, okay, if he's that concerned about the £1 billion a month that we're paying to the EU, that we do get something back for it, then why is it we can, all of us, not just Boris Johnson, but the BBC, the whole media, just ignore the fact that we're paying £1 billion a week, £52 billion a year, in interest on the bailout debts to a load of criminal bankers that give us what for it? What do we get for the £1 billion a week? What do we get in return for that money spent? Apart from austerity, thousands, tens of thousands of people dead, millions in destitution, struggling. Boris Johnson recently was celebrating the fact that unemployment is at an all-time low. Really? Unemployment's at an all-time low, but poverty is at an all-time high. That working people are having to queue up outside food banks, sit in cold houses through winter, skip meals to feed their children. That schools are having to now commit to provide food for children. They're to provide food for families. What is the point of having a job if actually you can't afford even to feed your family on it? What kind of a job is that? That's not a job, that's slavery. That is slavery. If you're working and you have to go and queue up outside a food bank, you are a slave. And the whole point of the social security system that the people of World War II, post-World War II, established in Britain, the whole welfare state was exactly about that a living wage meant a living wage. And if the system couldn't provide work, then it was going to provide us with social security, and we paid for it collectively through our national insurance payments that men like him, of his ilk, squandered. They raided all of the social trust funds, the social pensions, the trust funds. We know where it's gone. We know that David Cameron's been involved in it. I've shared Gordon Bowden's links before. I'll leave you all the links underneath here. But we have the evidence, okay? This is evidence that's out there already, that the media have never picked up on. The media have never bothered to pick up on the crimes committed by David Cameron. Okay? The media have never ever picked up on that. The crimes to do with nuclear weapons, the illegal sale of nuclear weapons. We have all of the evidence. Okay? We have the evidence of the MOD, the Ministry of Defence, lying to Parliament about depleted uranium that was used in Iraq, claiming that it had been through the Geneva Weapons Review, when it hadn't. People are dead. People are dying. Babies have been born dead and deformed. People are suffering. Because of lies. Lies being told by liars. People who commit serious crimes. Now, I want to know, okay, because we've already got now Boris Johnson stating very clearly his criminal intent to break the law. Now, I'm living in a country right now where people are being denied their life income, their basic pittance of an income that they get from the state because they're unemployed, because they're sick, because they're on work training, okay? They're a little bit late, 5 minutes late. Oh, somebody's decided they haven't looked for work hard enough. We're talking about mothers who are working part-time and being pressured to get more work. Oh, they miss an appointment. Bang. You're on a sanction. No money for you. Maybe for 3 weeks, maybe for 3 months. These are the kind of punishments that the people of our society are being meted out to them. People being arrested and fined and imprisoned for begging on the streets. Okay? That is what is happening to people. People on sanctions, forced to go and steal a Toblerone, end up in prison for 6 weeks. But this man has repeatedly lied, and he stated his criminal intent to break the law. Where are the arrests? Where are Britain's security services? Because what these people have done to our nation is a terrorist attack. That's what it is. That's what Brexit amounts to. It is a plot. It is a scheme. And just the fact that they've done it out in the open doesn't make it any less of a terrorist act. Just because a terrorist comes and stands in front of your house and says, well, I have lied my way into your local council offices, and now I'm coming to steal your home and drive you all into destitution. Sorry, no. Just because he comes out and states it, just because they've done this in the open, by hook or by crook, mostly by crook, does not make it any less a terrorist plot, because they have used lies and subterfuge to do it. And they have involved foreign powers of Israel, of America, of Russia, all of them far-right extremist financial interests. Now their plan, as again I've shared this before, but people need to see it. You need to see it, people. This is what the Tories are prepared to do. And we've seen they are quite happy to lose Northern Ireland, to lose Scotland, to even destroy the Conservative Party, to cause significant damage to the UK economy. Okay, and what for? For their Brexit. Why? Because they don't want to pay their taxes, because they do not want evidence of their fake businesses being known to all and sundry, that they may come under arrest because of their absolute abominable crimes. This man, on behalf and behest of her, went to South Africa to remove nuclear weapons that were illegally allowed to be developed in South Africa, with Israel involvement, Zionist Israelis and far-right interests in America, all of them colluding to provide South Africa during the time of apartheid with illegal nuclear weapons. And as soon as Nelson Mandela comes to power, oh bang, she sends him in there to remove those weapons that apparently the British government buys back, but 17 million of their British public funds ends up directly into the Tory party bank account. And a few years later, when David Cameron's when Tony Blair's in office, oh bang, the intelligence services are there telling him, well, there were these 3 nuclear weapons, and actually all of them went missing. And we think Saddam Hussein's got them. That's our intelligence. They knew damn well Saddam Hussein didn't have them. But Tony Blair saying, oh yeah, but obviously, you know, you can't say anything about it because it's very sensitive, because, you know, we can't have Margaret Thatcher, Lady Thatcher, involved in, you know, secret nuclear weapons deals with apartheid South Africa. I'm telling you now, and he had the audacity to talk about removing the vote from prisoners, how he finds it contemptible, abominable. Actually, he said it makes him feel sick to think of prisoners being given the right to vote, of convicts being given the right to vote. It actually makes him feel sick to think of them voting. This is a man who was dealing in illegal nuclear weapons. And that whole deal was then used to justify invasion of Iraq. And then using depleted uranium, illegal depleted uranium against Iraq. People wonder why I get so passionate, so upset. I tell you, it's been very bloody difficult living in this world and understanding what I understand and having the compassion that I have. I am very strong that I can feel these emotions and still get on through my day. Because, you know, I'm a survivor. I'm a survivor of 17 years of abuse. You get a backbone. You get to be able to feel and still continue and not be driven to violence and aggression. And to address it like I do, which is to do the research, present the facts, shove the facts in their faces. Now, the point of this particular article is exactly that, is to ask the security services now to start making the arrests and ask the British Parliament MPs now to start asking questions. Please do not stay on the gravy train narrative that has been set by a pack of liars and terrorist criminals. Please step out of their boxes and start asking questions about this £17.8 million that ended up in Tory party accounts directly through the sale of illegal nuclear weapons. Let's talk about that, please, before these nonsense criminals take us any further down their road to hell, because they are leading us to a road to hell. This is it. Singapore on the Thames. Visionaries. This is their visionaries. Okay? Mr. Javid, who actually worked prior to him becoming Chancellor of the Exchequer, he was actually working as a banker in Singapore, a tax haven. Now, this is a very serious threat against Britain, especially when we think we're losing Scotland. They don't care about that. We're losing Ireland. They don't care about that. England and Wales is going to be what? A tax haven. What happens in tax havens? Well, this was written, okay, in, I think it was 2002, it was published. These are the contributors. Austin Mitchell, Member of Parliament for Great Grimsby, UK. Prem Seeker, University of Essex, UK, USA. John Christensen, UK. Philip Morris, University of Stirling, UK. Stephen Filling, California State University, UK. Yes, published 2002. No accounting for tax havens. And this is what you can expect from a nation that is a tax haven. Okay? Secrecy, poor regulation and inadequate law enforcement in offshore tax havens is a magnet for drug traffickers, money launderers and criminals. More than 1.6 trillion a year is estimated to be laundered, mostly through tax havens that guarantee secrecy, ask no questions and rarely cooperate with international inquiries. The institutionalised corruption is destroying lives everywhere. Many of the offshore tax havens are British Crown territories and are promoted and defended by the UK government. Look at Jersey. Look, people, understand this, right? One thing that poverty delivers to psycho-sado fascists is women and children for abuse. First and foremost, they're the ones that are most desirable for sexual abuse and sexual slavery. As if the abuse problem against women and children wasn't already bad enough in this country. As if poverty hasn't delivered even more children already into the hands of criminals. Poverty is the bread and butter of every single abuser. Abuser psychology. That is what they rely on, because they know that poor people are vulnerable people. Poor children are vulnerable children. Who were the children that were preyed on in Rotherham? These gangs of child abusers, paedophiles, drug dealers, all with, you know, a handshake off the police, who would rather arrest a 11-year-old girl and charge her for being drunk and disorderly instead of, and leave all the men in whose house she was. Who would rather arrest the fathers of these young girls for kicking up a fuss about what's being done to their daughter. They'd rather arrest them, right? That is already in Britain without a tax haven, there isn't presently a tax haven, but has been governed by these evil people like Thatcher, who covered up child abuse. And it has been terrible for me growing up in this society and feeling that things were going to get better, that this, you know, people are starting to talk about the issues now, where they're starting to make the connections between abuse and poverty, and it's like, and where do we go? Suddenly 2019 we're back to the 1800s, back to the 1700s, stripping all our rights. And people of this generation do not know what it is like, but I know what it is like, because I grew up in abject poverty, ruled by a madman who was an alcoholic, gambler, child abuser, woman batterer. We lived in poverty. He took everything he needed. We had the bare minimum. I'm a child, went to school with holes in my shoes. I'm a child, the neighbours used to hear us screaming, phone the police look at the marriage certificate and say, sorry love, there's nothing we can do. It's a domestic. Because that was the attitude then. Women had no rights. My mum was working full time for half the pay of what a man would have got for the same job. Because she was a married woman. Never mind that her husband spent all his money on himself. So I know that same psychology as my twisted, screwed up so-called father. That is the same psychology that is there in the suit behind the facade of the Jacob Rees-Mogg, who had the audacity to actually state on TV that, you know, the concentration camps in apartheid South Africa during the Boer Wars, created by the British, where people died in their thousands, if not millions, of starvation and disease. Okay. Oh, apparently it wasn't really that bad. It wasn't really that bad because, you know, the same figures, the same amount of people were suffering and dying in Glasgow. So basically, you know, according to him, that's perfectly fine. That's perfectly fine to be living off the cream of a society where thousands upon thousands of people are literally dying in poverty. What would be left of Britain? Did my grandfather give his life in order for Britain to be, you know, the kingdom, the ultimate kingdom playground of every criminal in this world? That our bread and butter, whatever we manage to get out of it, is going to be, what? Food banks and no workers' rights? While they grab our children. Is Is that why we went through 2 world wars? No, it isn't. And I know, okay, I've studied history. I went to, somehow, even despite the poverty I was in, everything, I got myself educated. I went to Polytechnic. I studied history. I studied far beyond the bounds of my course, and I understand without a shadow of a doubt the terrible hardships and suffering that people went through. Never mind all this BBC glossy historical dramas that they show where everybody's wearing their fancy clothes and dresses. They were a minority. They were your 10%. You're talking 80% in poverty, either just below the poverty, either below the poverty line, on the poverty line, or just above it. 80%. And people should never forget that. People should never forget that before the war, families regularly watched their children die because they couldn't afford a doctor. People died in terrible circumstances. That is the world that my grandfather gave his life for, to end that world, to end this fascist rule, to stand up for the people's rights. The people of the 1930s, before World War II, were marching for their rights. They were marching for everything that Boris Johnson today wants to take away. And they were marching for it. And then it all got halted because it was World War II. And after World War II, they picked up right back again and they got those rights. And we can never, ever let them go. Because, as I have explained here, you know, that legacy was written in the blood of the very life force that set the light that shines in my heart today. It shines in your heart today because those people lived. Because people before them lived. Because they suffered and they worked their fingers to the bone. And they had hope. And they had courage. And they fought against fascists. And it is time that Parliament had a backbone. It is time that the people of this country in their civil service jobs turned around and started asking some serious questions. Because this has been horror for me. In fact, I've actually even been contemplating that, do you know what? I don't actually want to be alive to witness the results of it. Because it is absolute evil sadism being peddled at me with a spoonful of sugar from the BBC and all these pretty faces and dresses, and there's Theresa May in Parliament with a Christmas tree necklace on, baubles dangling before us while they talk about driving us back to the 18th century. It is outrageous. I don't even know how anybody could even think it. In fact, if they'd even mentioned any of this when my grandmother was alive, there would have been hell to pay. They wouldn't have even dared utter it, a word of it in Parliament. And the very fact that they have, and the very fact that Jacob Rees-Mogg can sit there playing down the horror of the concentration camps in South Africa during the Boer War, and actually play it down by comparing them to saying, well, you know, the same deaths were in Glasgow, and believe you me, that man will sit there happily and watch the same history repeat again in Britain. Never again, because like I say, the lasting social legacy that the inheritances of wealth and privilege will never defeat. Never. And I know people judge me. The people don't like a passionate, angry woman for some reason. It's offensive. Oh, but they all love an angry, passionate man, don't they? But I am not sexist. I understand the misogyny, filth that still lingers in British society to this very day. I have dealt with that all of my life. And I also know the new generation of men who are strong, who embrace their compassion. and who themselves are victimised and judged and oppressed by the same philosophy that stripped women of their rights, that stripped children of their rights, that today wants to strip the workforce of our rights and turn us into their evil, evil tax haven. So, ask the questions, please, Parliament, about the 1 billion a week. If Boris Johnson can get on BBC going on about the billion a month that we pay to the EU, that at least we get something back for, what are we getting for this 1 billion a week on behalf of a load of criminal bankers? And they've now got the audacity to even deliver Brexit. Seriously, they are laughing all the way to the bank. Well, it's about time we gave them such a slap that we wiped that smile right off their faces. Because as a smile, it's a sadistic, evil smile at our expense.